Welcome, everybody. My name is Carly Graham Garcia. I'm the Executive Director of the Feliciano Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation at Montclair State University. And I am joined today by Lorelei Bandrovschi, who is the founder and CEO of Listen Bar, based here in New York City. Lorelei, welcome.
Thank you. So nice to be here.
So tell us, what is Listen Bar?
Listen Bar is an alcohol-free bar, which means that our entire menu, which is mostly cocktails, is fully alcohol-free. And one other thing that's really cool about Listen Bar is that all of our bartenders are musicians. And in fact, not only have we gotten like insane press, like New York Times, Good Morning America, Today Show, but Snoop Dogg asked us to name a drink after him on our menu. So huge moment of recognition when that happened. And if you're wondering like, oh my God, where is Listen Bar? So it's actually moved around all over the city. We started as a proof of concept in South Williamsburg in October of 2018. And then we started throwing parties at venues all over the city for the past year and a half. And actually, before COVID hit, we were about to go on tour all over the US and actually internationally as well. So obviously that all shifted. And right now, Listen Bar is very much a virtual experience, and we're pivoting into new types of things. So we're not really restricted to one physical space. It's very much a concept that comes to life in a lot of different environments and in a lot of different configurations.
This is incredible. So I have so many follow-up questions. But the first, bring me back to some of your origins. So this business was started on a dare. So what's that about? And what's the story there? And what made you brave enough to try this, even though you were dared?
Okay, well, I'll give you guys, yes, it started on a dare. A friend of mine a couple years ago dared me to take a month off of drinking. And this was part of like a series of dares that I asked for a birthday. I had my golden birthday, when your age matches the date that you're born on, when I was 27. And I was really thinking about these, like, oh my God, like 27 Club, like embracing mortality, making the most of my life. And so I asked 27 people to give me a challenge that would help me grow as a person.
Wow.
So one of my friends who in college, when we met, like I would be the one trying to like get him to have his first drink with me because he never drinks. And so he really flipped the script on me, and he said, like, take a month off. And I went into it kind of like, okay, like I was pretty arrogant, to be honest. You know, I felt like, okay, this is a willpower dare. I can see how I will absolutely, you know, be able to do that, but I don't see how it's going to help me grow as a person. And of course, little did I know that when I actually tried it, it became so much more than just, you know, like a diet or a cleanse or something like that. It became this moment of reflecting on how I'm showing up in my life, in my social life, and how alcohol is showing up almost like, I wouldn't say uninvited, but unquestioned, you know, like in a way that is just so automatically assumed to be part of every situation that I never really took the time to ask myself, like, is this always contributing? Is this always like helping me have a great time? Is this sometimes getting in the way? And most importantly, like, what am I really like, you know, when that's removed from the equation? And turns out I really tend to like what I'm like. And I tend to give way too much credit for my ability to have a good time to the idea of social lubrication through alcohol. And so that was really sort of the blind spot that this experience uncovered. And what happened from there, this was like now 6 years ago. What happened from there is that, you know, I didn't all of a sudden go sober. I'm not sober now. I still basically drink whenever I want to, but I find myself wanting to drink a lot less. And I find that a lot of the times, if I have to imagine like the perfect night out, it tends to not involve alcohol. Like this was a surprising shift for me, but the more I've gotten comfortable with going out without drinking, the more I've gotten better at it and the more I tend to enjoy it. So the idea with Listen Bar was that when I do go out and I don't feel like drinking, there's all these different things that I have to navigate. I need to, find something decent on the menu that I enjoy drinking. I need to make everyone else around me comfortable with me not drinking. I need to deal with sometimes like sassy attitude from the bartenders who are gonna like try and make me feel weird if I'm not drinking, or overemphasize like that that there's no alcohol in this, right? So I wanted there to be a space that kind of curates to the experience of wanting to go out without drinking, and really looks at all of the facets and like builds for that, rather than trying to constantly be the one who had to make my experience fit within the context of a regular bar. I wanted an environment that is catered to that experience. And so I think we're about to get to this in another question, but I'll jump ahead and say that my background professionally was that I started out in advertising. I was a creative. I was, on task to work on branding and ad campaigns and things like that. And then I sort of pivoted into innovation consulting. And so then instead of building brands, I started helping to build businesses and build products and build services and practice what is called design thinking, which is when you cultivate, the entire ecosystem of a business around the needs of your customer. And you really kind of like start from that customer's mindset to build everything around it. And so I was doing that for all of these like super cool, major, massive, like Fortune 500 brands. A lot of times it were brands that hadn't necessarily started out from this like innovation centric mindset or design thinking centric like business model. And so things were moving quite slowly. And it made me really want to have something that was like built this way from the ground up. And it made me want to have something that was my own, as opposed to kind of fighting for incremental change at these huge, huge companies. And as I started going out without drinking, I kind of became that like core user in my design thinking mindset. And I started finding new people who, out of all the people who would say like, oh, you're not drinking tonight? Okay, whatever. Others would be like, oh, awesome. I've been cutting down, or yeah, like that's great. Here's like my favorite drink to try. Or I would go to bars and like I had a bartender who just crushed it and like made me the best drink. And turns out he was sober. And we had this super cool conversation about like what that looks like in a bar environment. And so I started kind of collecting these little pieces. And then I eventually decided to go full force into building a business for this unmet need in the market.
Oh man, all of that is amazing. I love hearing that story, and also sort of going through this process of really like building a customer base and getting customer feedback back even at the very early stages when you're talking with bartenders and with others. That's phenomenal. So it's been said that you set out to rewrite Nightlife, which in New York City is a huge statement. And actually, One thing that some of our viewers who are all around the world may not know is that New York City actually now has a deputy mayor of nightlife, because nightlife is such a huge component to the city and to tourism. There's actually a person who reports to the mayor of New York City in this role. So this is a really bold goal. So what was that originally the intent? I mean, was that kind of your thought, or was it more to create community and space? Because I feel like what you're telling us is a little bit like it's evolved to be a movement, but initially, was it to find a community?
Well, because of my process, because I come from this innovation background, I had all of these like tools and processes in place for how you set the groundwork for the business. So before we even had a name, I went through the exercise of figuring out our purpose, figuring out our values, figuring out like who the people are that I'm really trying to talk to. And this really was sort of before it was anything, before the experience existed itself. And I have to credit the agency where I used to work is called Co-Collective. They have this process called story doing, which is really like built around figuring out your story and like the reason you exist in this world, so that the people who care about making that same story come to life will know to find you, and will see themselves reflected in what you're working towards. And so I would say that actually, yes, while initially it kind of started from just trying to, create an experience that would meet my needs, in then taking the, eagle eye view of wanting to figure out what this is as a business, I decided that this was why, because right now, nightlife is built on alcohol. Like everything from the business model to how we interact socially and how we feel like it's possible to interact socially. And even beyond bars, when I look at music, like music is a huge part of our business. And so music is now so much built around alcohol. Like music venues make more money on the bar than they do on the tickets, things like that. Everything is really kind of built to come back to alcohol. And that was also one of the reasons why it was so hard for me to find experiences that were really catered to my needs, because there's that quote, I think it's Einstein, who says like, you can't solve a problem with the same mindset that created it. And so I kept waiting for people in the bar world to notice that there's something, bigger than alcohol that people have a real appetite for. But I had to realize that alcohol was so deeply ingrained into how bars have been told that they need to operate, that there just wasn't an incentive to go beyond that. Like it had to be someone coming from outside of the bar world, kind of like disrupting the model in order to challenge that. And so it was kind of from the get-go this like movement of like rewrite nightlife beyond alcohol, not to erase alcohol completely from the equation and sort of, bring back prohibition, but to make it so that nightlife can exist on this like broader spectrum where alcohol doesn't have to take up, like 100% of how things can operate.
Yeah, you are disrupting an industry, and I'm really glad that you use that terminology, because you're flipping it on its head, which I think is tremendous. Let's talk a little bit about funding, getting your business off the ground, and also scaling your business. And sort of from a funding perspective, what do you look towards? But bring us back to the beginning. You had this dare, which evolved into a concept, which evolved then into a business model based on your own experiences in the advertising space. Then what? Where did you get the money?
So when the dare happened, I was still in like full-time employment.
Yep.
I'm also an immigrant, so I was in the process of getting my green card. which meant that when that happened, I would have a lot more flexibility in terms of being a freelancer, starting a business, etc. So it was really good that I had this time of kind of incubating and like, you know, becoming clearer and more committed on wanting to do this. I also highly recommend this book by Miki Agrawal, the founder of Things, and Tushy. This book is called Do Cool Shit. And one of the questions around starting a business is this something that you can see yourself being passionate about for like 10 years? You know, because it was important to kind of see like whether my interest in this had longevity and if I wanted to be along for the ride of truly growing a business. And so in that incubation phase, all of that happened. And along the way, I also quit my job and decided to go freelance. I was part of this mentorship circle with an organization called OK Real, which focuses on like creative women empowerment. And I went into that mentorship circle thinking that I was going to ask for advice on how to be a successful freelancer. And I found myself for the first time whispering the words, I want to open an alcohol-free bar. And the room like just burst into interest. And I thought it was like, everyone's going to think I'm crazy, but it was the right room, the right people. And I got this kind of like courage to go for it. And then I went on like an Eat, Pray, Love travel adventure to kind of see, like I gave myself a couple months where I didn't have an answer to the question, what do you do? And I allowed that to be sort of my baseline in order to see like, what do I want that answer to be and what are possible, you know, hypotheses that are mulling about. And then I came back and I was like, okay, it's this. I want to do this. I want to open this. It's Listen Bar. Let's go. And so at that point, I started building the brand. I worked with one of my friends in Romania, Tokyo Toys, to develop the logo and the branding. And at first, it was just like an Instagram page. Mm-hmm. And while this was all happening, I was freelancing and advertising and innovation, trying to build up my initial capital. And then I got to my target and I decided that I wanted to launch the first experience in time for Sober October, also in time for my birthday, since that like initial birthday challenge had been such a big part of our story. And so the initial, like everything from like the initial proof of concept, the initial branding, the like development of the menu, all of that was self-funded through my freelancing. And then once that happened, I also knew pretty early on that I wanted to go into crowdfunding. I wanted to do that for a couple of reasons. One, because it's an amazing way to get access to funding. Two, because it's an amazing way to test the concept and build out like my consumer like hypothesis of like, yes, this is something people want. This is something people want to like put money against. And I'm not crazy to want to spend the next 10 years working on this, because the idea of having a proof of concept was also like being open to feedback, even if that meant hearing something I didn't want to hear. Like if it was no one shows up, like that is valuable data.
Yeah. Yeah.
But instead, we were in the Wall Street Journal before we poured our first drink. We got insane press, and there were all these like mood board manifestations where I was like, I want to be in Refinery 29. And we got this glowing article. We got Vice to like, who I thought were going to completely like rip us apart and just be like, oh my God, look at these guys. And totally the writer who came through, like got it, loved it, had been looking for it. And it was all of these like moments of validation. And so that's when I used that proof of concept also to record a lot of the content for a crowdfunding video. So that was when, you know, it didn't have to just be me talking about the idea of, we could do a crowdfunding campaign based on the experience of what had happened. And so we did a crowdfunding campaign through iFund Women, who have been an incredible platform for us, and taught me so much about crowdfunding. Like, if anyone is thinking about starting a business, A, I highly recommend crowdfunding. B, I highly recommend iFund Women. And not just as a platform, but also as like a community and resource center that just walks you and holds your hand. I actually got one of their coaching packages, which was incredibly instrumental in figuring out what I was doing and how I wanted to do it. And so then with iFund Women, we were able to raise over $50,000 towards a physical location. And that actually ended up happening. What's really good about the platform is that while you really want to have this kind of like focused time-based campaign, primarily like in like thinking about it as like a 1 month thing, iFund Women does allow you to extend your campaign. And so I knew that I was going to be like getting press. I knew that I was going to be speaking at festivals and panels. So I knew that there were going to be these like new spikes in interest. And so with iFund Women, we were able to capture that and keep our campaign open so that people can continue to contribute whenever like something new happens.
That's tremendous. Oh my gosh. So many questions there, especially just the sort of crowdfunding along the continuum. But I guess, you know, it also makes me wonder and want to ask about the press, because so much of what we hear from entrepreneurs that we get a chance to work with is, you know, how do I use social media? How do I drum up press interest? And so you're talking about actually having a Wall Street Journal piece before you even had a proof of concept, before you even had something for people to physically walk through. Do you attribute that to, you know, your background on the agency side, or was it word of mouth that you had been able to kind of seed with the right folks in New York City beforehand? Teach us how to do that, because that's so unheard of.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, it is a combination of a couple of things. And I do actually, typically it's a secret reward for iFund Women members. But since I know this is going to go out to students and other, you know, awesome people, I do offer a secret reward that gives you my press tips and the examples of the initial press releases that I sent out to get that. But what I would say were sort of the defining factors were, one, I really knew what I wanted that press to be. Like, it was very clear to me what I was going for, and everything that I had done was leading up to it. Like, to the point that I knew what I wanted. I had written out the headline, you know, of what I wanted those articles to say, and I pictured what it would look like. And I knew, like, the Wall Street Journal hit us up being like, hey, like, we want to put you in tomorrow's newspaper. And we hadn't even like, they were like, we need a picture. We didn't even have, like, they were just putting up the sign above the door. And I was like, okay, like, one of the members from our team who was on the press team had like a good camera. I was like, okay, go home, get your camera. We've got like, you know, 2 hours before we lose sunlight. Like, we need to get this picture for the Wall Street Journal, because that's what's going to make the story. And I knew kind of what they would be looking to show and what they would be looking to say. So really, like, planning your press in advance and thinking about what your story is. Like, I was very deliberate with kind of fitting into an editorial calendar around the topic of Sober October, so that it's not just a story about Listen Bar, but an editor can see how it would fit into the interests and what's relevant to their audience at that moment. So that is super important. You know, thinking about your trends. One of the reasons why Listen Bar has gotten this insane amount of press is because there was this sort of like moment in time where a lot of different things were happening. A couple months later, for Dry January, Ruby Warrington put out her book, Sober Curious. And so all of these people wanted to talk about the book, but they wanted to talk about the book in the context of this like cultural phenomenon. And so when they were looking for people to say, look at all these sober curious people, they were looking for people at Listen Bar, you know?
Amazing. Very smart, Lorelei. I don't want to cut you off. Keep going.
No, you're good. I can talk too long about this, but basically think about your press in advance, be editorial in your calendar. And then, yeah, I would say that my background in writing helped a lot because, well, I wrote an article first. I wrote a Medium article that got us our first initial press in Culture Trip, actually. And at that point, it was just the idea of, but it also was really influential in getting that community aspect of people who were like, oh my God, I'm so excited about what you're trying to do. And so that's when like the word of mouth and, you know, like looking for writers and things like that, that was when having that initial community that was excited about us played a really big part.
That's tremendous. Wow. So that's also incredibly great advice for everybody listening. So I want to talk about how we book Listen Bar and virtual parties and sort of how your business model has evolved. So 2 final questions. This is the first one. So here in Montclair, outside New York City, we now have for the university its first off-campus incubator. And it is a very cool industrial space that's sort of nestled in a retail community. This type of concept would be amazing in a space like that. How do you decide where to, you know, lend your talent, pop these up, and then what does it cost?
Right. Well, we haven't done any pop-ups as of yet outside of New York City. That was sort of the plan with our tour. And one of the things with tour is that I'm obsessed with data. That's sort of the background from coming from innovation and research, is that we actually have a survey up where we were getting people to help pick the zip code that we should open our permanent location in here in New York City. And also like people could request like what cities they want us to come to, you know, all over the country. So we could see like where it makes sense for us to plan our tour. Plus, obviously, if there were certain festivals and things like that where it made sense, you know, we would do that. We also then, as we had started like putting more information out with the fact that we were going on tour, I was getting like hotels on like tropical islands being like, hey, we will pay you, book you, like fly you out here, put you up, because we see how there is like a huge you know, benefit to being part of this like cool trendy thing, and why our specific audience would resonate with this message. So for me, it's always about like mutually beneficial. Like, is this where the people are? And if so, like, is this environment going to create like the Listen Bar vibe? Is it going to feel kind of like cozy and gritty and divey, but also like classy? Like it's this like classy, divey, you know, mix of things that we try to strive for, that keeps it casual, but also makes it feel special. And so then, you know, it's a budget thing, like looking at the cost of getting out there, looking at, you know, what the available space is for us to do prep in for our drinks. Typically, we don't really throw parties unless there's going to be like 100 plus people there, so that it makes sense for our business model. And then I've also had like festivals want to book us where it's like, like 600 people. And I'm like, okay, like we need to figure out if we can scale to that, because we like to keep a very high caliber of experience. We don't want to, like, when we go super high volume, we still want the drinks to be super good. We still want you to have like a moment with the bartender. So we haven't quite gone to that scale yet to figure out like what needs to tweak in the model to make that work. But yeah, you know, it becomes sort of a case by case budget of looking at costs, looking at income, and also like motivation. You know, like some places will spend a lot of money on bringing us there, like the hotels that I mentioned, because they know that they're going to make that money back from the people who are going to book out the hotel that entire weekend. So they're not worried about like making their money back at the bar. You know, it's playing out for them because it's feeding into a different part of their business model. So for people who, you know, are looking to book us to travel somewhere, you know, it's about like, are you investing in this for your community, or like, where are you hoping to get the money back? Because usually our business model is a combination of tickets, drink sales, and depending on our programming, some other stuff. So if that isn't inherently a part of it, then we look at like, okay, well, this is what this person would need to invest on top of drink sales in order to bring us out.
Got it. But you envision Listen Bar, which inherently is sort of tied to musicians and music, which I love that connection, and sort of, you know, co-locating with festivals, because that's, you know, brilliant for a variety of reasons. But you envision a permanent location, an actual physical location that would be in New York City, as well as this concept of kind of, you know, virtual private parties, but pop-ups of the brand and other locations. Just if I'm understanding correctly, that's all included.
That is the current vision for Listen Bar in probably a broader time frame than I had originally intended. Right now, watching the way that COVID has had such a huge impact on the bar and restaurant world, I will say that I feel very lucky in a sense that we have been operating without a physical location, which has enabled us to have really low overhead. And, you know, like we haven't been hit as hard, and we've also been able to pivot into other things without being so tied down by like, okay, well, it has to be tied to this space. We have to be making this amount of like rent and permits and, you know, product cost.
Yeah.
So I think what is really cool about Listen Bar as a model is that, you know, while I see that as being something that is just naturally makes sense for us to ultimately have like physical home bases in New York and eventually in other cities as well, I'm in much less of a rush to get there. I see a lot more opportunity in kind of existing as this like low overhead, more flexible model.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Lorelei, you've given us so much. I've got one final question for you, and you've there have been a lot of nuggets of advice sprinkled throughout, but for our early stage entrepreneurs who are listening in, who might be dared like you were dared, what are some of the do's and don'ts? I mean, what is some of that advice that you've carried forward? You shared a little bit, but is there any, you know, the do cool shit I wrote down, people need to buy that book and read it. But what else? Is there anything that really sticks with you that you can pay it forward to our listeners?
I would say definitely, yeah, going back to that book, figure out if you're going to be passionate about this for a while. I would say build your team. Like the fact that I have a team that I really love and trust, that I've been able to work with ongoingly throughout this time, even when things get weird and hard like they are right now with this pandemic. It is very important to have that kind of energy, because you know, it really is a marathon and not a sprint. So you like self-care becomes a lot more important. And sometimes self-care looks like, you know, sitting down and doing your taxes. You know, it's not all like bubble baths and meditating. Like sometimes self-care becomes very like face the thing that's got you feeling overwhelmed, and, you know, just spend 15 minutes on the scariest, hardest thing. And, then you'll notice that it's not like the 5-hour monster that you had envisioned. And it's probably like a 2.5-hour like power walk. But self-care, team, like have your people to vent to, have your people to like be really naked with. Like talking about money with friends is something that I've gotten increasingly comfortable, and I have my friends that I talk to about like the stuff that is often kind of hidden in culture, and it just feels really, really good to make sure that if there's any part of your life that brings you shame, like find the places to like vent that out and to get support for yourself. Because definitely there were times where I would get like, oh my God, we are not like at the point of like financial success that I want to be, or like, oh my God, like this is where I had planned to be with the tour and this is what's happening instead. And am I crazy to be here and still want to be donating all of this money to my staff? You can get crazy. So having people to feel safe in your crazy is really, really important. Building out business plans, setting out goals. I'm a part of this community called Boss Babe that I really love, and it's been super helpful to think about like, okay, what does success actually mean? And if you're looking to get like 500 people to do something, then it probably means that you need to ask like 2,000, in order to get those 500. So getting really like tactical. And I will say like grit, like you will hit roadblocks that you never knew like could totally like shut you down. And so building up your inner confidence in your ability to like creatively problem solve, in your willingness to find solutions when something isn't going the way you initially wanted. I call it find your pool table. And I'll probably do an article on why it's called that, but there was a time when, okay, I'll give you the quick version. When we first were looking for a space, I fell in love with the space, and I had put it on my mood board. I'd like put the Listen Bar logo on it. I was in love. It was it. And last minute, right before we were going to announce the pop-up, it fell through. So I was, oh my God, nothing's going to work out. Nothing's going to happen. We're going to miss October, end of the world. And as I was trying to get myself excited about a new place, I was still in love with that first place. I like everything felt lesser than, and I couldn't get myself excited. And then eventually I decided, you know what? We're going to find a new place. And it's going to be better than the old place because it's going to be bigger. And because it's bigger, we're going to put a pool table in there. And then all of a sudden my mindset shifted, and like the old place was like, okay, that was then, this is now, we're getting a pool table. And lo and behold, after I made that kind of mindset shift, I found the perfect venue at the perfect location. And as soon as I walked in, I saw the spot where a pool table would just fit. And so that exercise happens over and over and over again. And it's really important to know in yourself that like, okay, this is how it feels when you're crashing down and everything's falling apart. But right around the corner is where you find that willingness to get creative and figure out like what you're excited about and like find your pool table.
Lorelei, amazing. Thank you so much for spending time with us today and sharing your story. Listen Bar, tell folks where they can find you.
Well, this is perfect because I was going to tell you a little bit about what's happening next. So, well, I don't know when you guys are going to be watching this, so it may have already happened, but you can find us at www.listen.bar, on Instagram at listenbar. I am at Listen Lorelei. And right now with COVID, what's been really helpful is having that initial purpose of rewrite nightlife beyond alcohol. Because when you're looking to innovate your business, it's really important to know what business you're ultimately in and what shape that can take. Because when you have the right purpose, you can take so many different directions in achieving that in creative ways. And so I'm really lucky that I don't think about us being stuck into like the business model of how a bar operates. Like, we're not in the bar business. We're in the rewriting nightlife beyond alcohol business. And so what we're doing now is that we are actually about to launch our first mastermind series, which is called Night Shift. And it's going to be for people who want to rewrite nightlife and create like the next iteration, which feels just so perfect for what we're doing right now during COVID. And also in general, like, this is the community that we bring together. It's all kind of creative, visionary, like just kind of disruptive people. And so we're creating this virtual experience that's going to bring them all together. And it's kind of going to be like a nightlife incubator, where at the end of it, we're so psyched on all of the ways this is going to ripple out into culture. And then the next thing that we're working on is actually we're about to publish our first research report. So we're going to be releasing some of the data that we've been collecting since day one around like the mindset shifts and what makes our community like gravitate towards a place like Listen Bar, like what it says about how drinking culture is changing on a bigger scale. So if any of that is interesting, check us out. We also have alcohol-free cocktail classes that you can take on demand and learn all of our menu. And you can book us for a private party if you're looking to do something virtual with your friends, and you've got like a special occasion where you're like, okay, like let's get Listen Bar and a dominatrix and a self-massage expert and do like a little special session together. We are very game for that. So check us out. Hope you got a lot out of this. This was really fun for me.
Lorelei Bandrovschi, founder and CEO of Listen Bar. Thank you so much for being with us.